Well, I guess it was only a matter of time before this happened. Scooby-Doo and the Gourmet Ghost premiered at San Diego Comic-Con on July 22, 2018, with the digital release on August 28th and the physical release on September 11th. The big draw for this one is the appearance of several celebrity chefs, specifically Bobby Flay and Giada DeLaurentis, although frequent Food Network judge Marcus Samuelsson and his wife Maya Hale also make appearances. It was written by Tim Sheridan and directed by Doug Murphy. The film opens in the American colonial era, specifically 1780, as we'll find out later, where we meet Chef Edward Duflay, who purchases some supplies in town and gets generally fawned over by the townsfolk before heading back to the Rocky Harbor Inn, which is our primary location for this movie. However, his night of cooking is interrupted by an unwanted visitor.
Beware! 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 Red ghost! Red ghost! Red ghost!
From there, we go to the credits, which shows the history of the inn as time passes to the present. And then we go to the gang, where once again, the usual convenient trope of a heretofore unknown relative invites them to the inn.
It sure was nice of your uncle to invite us to stay at his inn.
I can't wait to see what he's done with the place.
Velma also drops some exposition about the Rocky Harbor Inn, revealing that it's been closed down ever since Edward Duflay disappeared. Scooby eats all the food the gang packed, and Fred says he's sure his Uncle Bobby won't let them go hungry. Yes, Bobby Flay is Fred's uncle in this movie, and he's converted the inn into the Rocky Harbor Culinary Resort. Basically, it's a food camp for rich foodies. Oh, and why has Fred never mentioned his famous uncle before?
Exactly the kind of place you'd expect to find a world-famous chef.
World famous?
Don't tell us you've never heard of Bobby Flay.
Of course I have. He's my uncle I just introduced you.
Yeah, Fred has absolutely zero clue about how famous his uncle is, which, even for Scooby-Doo, is stretching willing suspension of disbelief to the breaking point. Needless to say, the boys are thrilled, to the point where Scooby passes out from sheer joy. When he comes to, Bobby introduces the gang to his cat Nacho and gives them the grand tour. The main part of the inn has been restored to what it was during the American Revolution, while the section that was rebuilt during the credits houses a state-of-the-art cooking arena, complete with its own disturbing AI system.
Thanks, Rocky.
You're very welcome, Bobby.
Yeah, I understand that over there, on what I am increasingly coming to laughingly term reality, there's a bunch of controversy concerning the use of AI these days, which has caused this aspect of the movie to age poorly. Anyway, the guests at the resort can learn from some of Bobby's friends.
Oh, man. Is that Giada DeLaurentis?
Oh!
Yup, and the lovely Bella DeLaurentis.
So Fred knows who Giada DeLaurentis is, but not that his uncle is famous. That old suspension of disbelief isn't looking so suspended. I'll let it slide, but you're on thin ice, movie. Marcus and Maya are introduced, and we get a flashback of how Shaggy made an ass of himself at a book signing they were doing.
Wait, this is not our book.
It's Giada's book? Really?
Could you ever make it out to Shaggy with love?
Never do this to an author. Ever. However, we do have a couple of fictional celebrity chefs to round out the characters, such as high-strung Skip Taylor, voiced by Dana Snyder.
I am 30 or 40 years old and I do not need this.
Skip says he hasn't slept because of the Red Ghost, but Bobby quickly cuts him off, rousing the gang's suspicions. Bobby plays dumb and distracts them with offers of food, which of course makes the boys happy. But there's a hitch, as the gang are all joining the rest of the guests in cooking their own meals and learning from Bobby's sous chef. But before details can be explained, they're interrupted by the groundskeeper, Jeremiah Noseworthy, voiced by Jim Cummings.
It's no say worthy, no say from the Latin. Why would it be
nose.
Nope. We've done young Frankenstein already in these movies. He's called Noseworthy. Moving on. Noseworthy plays Crazy Ralph.
It's got a death curse.
Thank you. Anyway, Noseworthy spills the beans about the red ghost, much to Bobby's dismay. Bobby tells the story to the gang and confirms that some people at the inn have said they've seen the red ghost, but that he hasn't seen it himself, so he's not convinced it's anything more than a story. As everyone heads inside when the weather turns bad, it turns out somebody is watching. The next day, Shaggy and Scooby arrive late to the cooking arena where the rest of the gang are waiting for Bobby's sous chef. And apparently Bobby's doing a live show that night from the cooking arena to promote the resort. And then we finally meet Bobby's sous chef.
I am sous chef. Chef Sue.
Ugh. Meanwhile, the press is outside covering the event and Noseworthy gets an opportunity to make his feelings public.
Edward Flay was no hero. He was a traitor, he was. A vile, disreputable, low-down traitor.
Gee, tell us how you really feel, Jeremiah. Meanwhile, Skip makes plans to leave, ranting to Nacho about how he's terrified of the red ghost. And some sharp-looking dude in a suit shows up and starts taking measurements. Nacho hits the bell for Bobby, and for some reason, Skips decides to stay instead. And as for the dude in the suit...
Bradley Blass. I'm in real estate. I have to tell you, Mr. Flay, you and your furry friend there are sitting on a gold mine.
Blass is staying at the resort, but suspiciously doesn't want any help with his bags. But before Bobby can think too hard about this, Daphne shows up to have him stop Sue from murdering Shaggy and Scooby for eating all the ingredients before the meal even gets a chance to get made.
The all of onion and all of parsley. And 2 pounds raw biscuit dough.
Okay.
As Bobby sends Sue off to make more biscuit dough, another potential suspect shows up. Henry Metcalf, a local historian who wrote a book about the history of the inn, and Edward Duflay. He's been assisting with the restoration of the inn and isn't exactly thrilled with what Noseworthy had to say on the news.
The gall, calling Chef Edward a traitor. The man was a hero. And not just to the colonials, even the British loved him.
Metcalf is interrupted by his cell phone going off, but ignores it, delving into the backstory of how Edward opened the inn to everyone, and colonial French and British troops would all come in for food, and every customer would receive what was, essentially, takeout, wrapped up in parchment paper for the road. Metcalf presents Bobby with a sheet of that same parchment paper, and Fred invites Metcalf and his wife to sit with the gang at the TV broadcast that night. Speaking of, the show starts off strong until the lights start flickering and everything goes haywire. And it's at this point that the red ghost shows up. Chaos ensues as a panic breaks out and everyone rushes to get out of the arena. Velma uses a handy fire extinguisher and gets the red ghost to buzz off. However, the arena winds up being a complete disaster, which doesn't bode well for Bobby, who's sunk most of his life savings into the place. Nearly everyone staying at the resort bails, including Marcus and Maya, leaving the gang, Bobby, Giada, and Skip behind. Meanwhile, Bella winds up in the hedge maze behind the inn. After Bobby is forced to shut down Rocky because the entire system is still fritzing out, and the AI tries to attack everyone with dishes, your obligatory killbot rampage has happened, Giada theorizes why the ghost presence might make everything go haywire.
Well, ghosts have long been known to exhibit electrical phenomena.
She's right.
Holy hell, make a note, folks. This is probably the last time we'll ever hear Velma even remotely acknowledge the supernatural might exist without being smug about it. Anyway, it's time to split up. Fred, Velma, and Daphne take the grounds, while Shaggy, Scooby, Bobby, and Giada search the inn, leaving Skip to answer the phones. And it turns out there's still someone else at the resort.
I'd like to be turned down.
The answer is no!
I admit it, I laughed harder at this joke than it probably warrants, but it's funny, damn it. Blast tells Skip he's waiting for a delivery and demands to see Bobby, storming off before Skip can stop him. Out on the grounds, Fred, Velma, and Daphne are surprised by Chef Sue, who reports that Skip isn't answering the phones. Fred goes off with her to try to get things under control. Velma almost immediately trips over a cable strung across the path, which is leading from the inn to Noseworthy's cottage. And we get an answer to a question that many have asked in this modern era.
Have we talked about LASIK?
Yes, and I'm still not a candidate.
Back at the inn, Shaggy and Scooby convince Bobby and Giada to look for a secret passage in Chef Edward's study while Fred arrives to deal with the phones. Blast shows up and asks Fred if Bobby would ever sell the place. When Fred answers in the negative, he grins, asks Fred to have Bobby get a hold of him, and reiterates that he's expecting a delivery and wants it sent to his room as soon as it arrives. Meanwhile, Daphne and Velma talk to Noseworthy, who elaborates on Duflay being a British sympathizer.
The man was a sympathizer to the crown. It's all written down there in his personal papers, which we're not allowed to inspect. since that lousy Henry Metcalf had the entire no-say-worthy family banned from the library.
Daphne notices a lot of boxes outside the front door of the cottage and assumes Noseworthy is moving since Bobby fired him but still allows him to live at the cottage. Noseworthy gets cagey, but Velma quickly moves on to the cable and points out a junction box. Noseworthy says it's the main power junction for the inn, but it's a temporary setup as the inn isn't completely wired up yet to support all the upgrades Bobby has brought in. He also tells the girls to check out the library and see Duflay's personal papers for themselves. But as the girls start back to the inn...
Well, how can you catch that fire demon if you don't know why it came for Duflay in the first place?
Back in the study, the search for a secret passage is a bust, and Bobby gets a phone call which immediately fritzes out. Everybody starts worrying about the ghost appearing, but that quickly gets forgotten when Nacho uncovers a trapdoor under the carpet. This is not a good thing, as they quickly find out. This, of course, leads to a chase, but the movie decides to switch over to Daphne and Velma at the library. While Velma searches colonial-era records, Daphne checks out a display about Chef Edward, which, among other items, includes a lemon juice bottle. But it also appears to be missing something, given the way the dust in the bottom of the case is collected. She checks with the librarian to see if there's another display that has Edward's personal papers, but the librarian says the only papers they had were the sheets of parchment Metcalf gave to Bobby, and those were blank. Fred calls them asking if they know where Shaggy, Scooby, or Skip are. The girls respond in the negative, and Fred tells them to come back to the inn. Shaggy and Scooby's group come racing into the lobby, but when Fred opens the door, Skip is on the other side saying he took a nap. Everyone regroups in the arena where Bobby makes cookies and says he figures Noseworthy knows more than he's telling. He tries to get Rocky to set a timer, but it's still on the fritz and nearly clobbers him with one of the arena's mechanical arms, spilling a bag of flour in the process. But it turns out Bobby made an error with the parchment paper he's baking with.
I think you'll want to come take a look at this.
During the Revolutionary War, spies would send messages written in invisible ink, which was really just citrus juice that dried clear.
The messages written on the parchment paper appear to have been messages about American troop movements which would only have value to the British, making it look like Edward Duflay was spying for the British. And while Velma explains all this, the Red Ghost shows up and steals the remaining sheets of parchment, but Scooby's the only one to see it. He is ignored as Velma warms to her subject. The Red Ghost leaves the arena, but surprisingly trips on the rug in the lobby. Everyone quickly discovers the parchment is gone, as is Skip, and then we get padding, as Scooby, for some reason being too terrified to talk about what he saw, acts out everything we just saw for the benefit of everyone in the room. Now, I realize this is probably homaging similar times Scooby acted stuff out for the gang in the early days of the TV series, but come on. This is just redundant, and the whole sequence could have been a lot tighter and a lot more interesting if Velma revealed what was on the parchment, and then the Red Ghost shows up to swipe the other sheets. As it is, this is just the movie spinning its wheels. Oh, and then it tries to justify the whole thing.
It's a good thing he did act it out because it's given us a clue. Scooby just tracked through the flour Bobby spilled earlier, but there's more than one set of tracks.
And you needed Scooby to act this out when the footprints were right there on the floor where anyone with working eyes could see them. Whatever, moving on. The gang follow the footprints back to the lobby. The Red Ghost hears them coming and rushes up the stairs, tripping as it goes, so it drops the parchment sheets onto a chair. Fred, Velma, and Daphne chase the ghost upstairs while Scooby and Shaggy go off to guard the kitchen. And Giada and Bobby find Nacho next to the dropped parchment. Upstairs, Fred, Velma, and Daphne lose the ghost but find Skip asleep in his room using a CPAP machine. As they leave, Velma realizes that, unlike the other times the ghost has appeared, the electronics haven't gone haywire this time. Blast shows up wanting to know if his delivery's arrived, and while he stands there, the lights begin to flicker, but his phone is seemingly unaffected. Down in the kitchen, the Red Ghost shows up outside the window, and Shaggy and Scooby's cries brings everyone downstairs. The ghost tries to smash through the window, but fails and flies off. A thudding sound is heard coming from the lobby, but it turns out to be a drone with Blast's package, which also turns out to be a legal document declaring the inn a historic landmark requiring preservation, which is going to be costly and shut down the culinary camp. Blast, of course, generously offers to buy the place outright from Bobby, thus taking on the financial burden. Except there's one problem with Blast's plan.
Chef Edward Duflay was no patriot. He was a traitor.
Oh, there's no reason anyone outside this group ever needs to know that.
But before Bobby can make a decision, the Red Ghost zooms by and most of the group chases after, with Blast going back inside and Velma running in the other direction for some reason. The gang chase the ghost into the hedge maze, but it quickly turns the tables on them. Meanwhile, Velma arrives at Noseworthy's cottage and gets the groundskeeper to unlock the junction box. The gang gets cornered on a cliffside, but before the red ghost can do anything, Bella, remember her, shows up and attacks the ghost. The power goes out to the resort, and the ghost collapses on the ground. Velma arrives to explain what's going on.
It's just a drone.
In a big billowy cloak.
Yep, a tiny electromagnet designed to emit a pulse that disrupts the operation of nearby electronic devices, like walkie-talkies.
Since the drone had to be controlled remotely through the resort's Wi-Fi, shutting down the power killed the internet routers and shut down the drone. But a drone couldn't leave footprints or steal the parchment, which means there's a second red ghost. And Fred has a plan to catch it. First off, send 500 invitations to the entire town.
What? Elton John's not coming? We don't even know Elton John.
We need to make sure people show up.
Part of the plan involves a grand reopening of the resort, and while promoting it on the news, Fred lets it be known that they plan on revealing Edward Duflay's secret at the event. And speaking of surprises, that is most definitely not Elton John. Thankfully, the gang take over and are about to reveal the information on the parchment, but the red ghost appears and steals them. But the gang are ready for it. Which, naturally, leads to the reveal.
And I'm not really Elton John. I'm TV's Skip Taylor.
You're history's greatest monster.
No, not that. The red ghost is Bradley Blass, who wanted the inn for cheap but also didn't want Edward Duflay's reputation tarnished, hence using the red ghost scare to try to convince Bobby to sell and trying to steal the parchment. But as Giada points out, scaring off the tourists in the first place doesn't make any sense for a real estate developer. Except... Since Metcalf's entire career and the livelihood of the town revolved around Edward Duflay's reputation as a patriotic hero, when he found evidence that Duflay may have been a traitor, he believed that Duflay had personal papers confirming this hidden somewhere at the inn. But as long as the inn was closed, it was unlikely anyone would find out. But when Bobby arrived to restore the inn, Metcalf knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came out, so he used the legend of the Red Ghost to force Bobby to shut down the inn and buy it himself. What he didn't know until the ease dropped on everybody in the kitchen was that the parchment he had given Bobby was what he was looking for all along.
And I would have gotten away with it too, if it weren't for you.
Hold on, we're not quite there yet.
Because, thanks to Velma looking at the historical records at the library, she figured out that the troop movements that Duflay passed to his British contact were completely wrong. Duflay was a patriotic hero working counterintelligence on behalf of George Washington. Which, yes, means that, aside from the actual story coming out and a ton of publicity for the resort, everything Metcalf did was completely pointless.
A really futile and stupid gesture.
And as the gang make their goodbyes and head out of Newport Cove, Shaggy realizes there's still one dangling thread.
If there was no such thing as the Red Ghost, what was Chef Edward shouting the night he disappeared?
He wasn't shouting Red Ghost, he was shouting Red Coats, a popular term for English soldiers back then.
Now, I'm not gonna lie, the first time I saw Scooby-Doo and the Gourmet Ghost, I didn't really like it. I wasn't crazy about the celebrity chef involvement or the story in general. However, looking at it again, this is actually a fairly solid movie. The mystery's a little convoluted, and I'm never a fan when the franchise tries to make a double reveal work when it's still one person behind everything, but for the most part, everything gels here. The main flaws are that this is about 45 minutes worth of story with a 75-minute runtime, so there is a ton of padding here. And even this would have been fine if some of the scenes had jokes which were funny, but most of them just aren't and could have easily been cut out. Another minor gripe I have is that while Bobby Flay and Giada DeLaurentis are definitely committing to the bit and giving it their all, they're not really actors, being more comfortable as TV presenters. As such, from time to time, their performances can come off as kind of stilted and wooded compared to the rest of the cast, who are more experienced voice actors. But these aren't really deal breakers by any means. Overall, I'd put this as a pretty good mid-range entry in these movies, and if you haven't seen it before, I'd say it's worth a watch. And with that, it's time to clear the table of another of the 30-plus films of Scooby-Doo.
Scooby-Dooby-Doo!
Here come those meddling kids to join the chase. No creep can keep them away.